Julius Caesar for iHearShakespeare. Written and performed in 1599, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar has long been taught in middle and high schools across the United States due to what is often referred to as its accessible nature. Indeed, it's one of Shakespeare's most linear and straightforward plays, but Shakespeare's art is to such an immense degree that to approach the play without being mindful of the playwright's characteristic nuances and subtleties would be unwise. We are further encouraged to tune in to the implications of the play when we consider the political climate of Shakespeare's time, not only for what applies to his then reigning queen, Queen Elizabeth I, but for the parallels that can be made throughout Western history. Consider the opening of Julius Caesar. Caesar has just returned victorious from a military campaign, which has further established his competency as an unquestioned ruler. With no apparent successor, the question on everyone's mind is, what's next for Caesar? Does he intend to make himself greater than Rome? And so other surrounding political peers fear Caesar's ambition and begin conspiring to assassinate him for the good of Rome. In Queen Elizabeth's case, she too had no heir, and her absolute rule begged the same question: what's next for Elizabeth, and does she intend to set herself above Parliament? With these parallels in place, the student is now prompted to ask, was Shakespeare trying to say something to Queen Elizabeth I through the play Julius Caesar? Shakespeare was far too clever and subtle for such plain commentary. Instead, there is an air of ambiguity and nuanced phrasing that compels the playgoer to examine carefully the composition of each scene and the play as a whole, which will inform the smartest responses. In productions today, you will likely see allusions to current events or major events from the not-so-distant past that make what happens in the play all too contemporary. It would be plausible, for example, to set the play in the early 1960s of the United States with the intention of drawing parallels between the assassination of John F. Kennedy and Julius Caesar. And now, let's begin Act 1, Scene 1 of Julius Caesar for iHearShakespeare. Act 1, Scene 1 begins with Morellus and Flavius engaging certain working-class citizens in the hopes of sending them home rather than celebrating in the street the recent return of Julius Caesar from a successful military expedition over the sons of Pompey. Morellus explains that these workmen are desecrating the memory of the great Pompey, who they once cheered so enthusiastically in their current celebrations. The workmen are commanded to run home and fall upon their knees and pray for forgiveness, while Flavius advises the removal of any decorations and ornaments that may be hung on public statues. Morellus hesitates at Flavius's order, stating that it is the feast of Lupercal, so decorations may be appropriate. Flavius reiterates his order, making it clear that their actions are about Caesar, so that his growing greatness will not keep us all in servile fearfulness. Scene 2 takes the action to Caesar and some other aristocratic figures who have gathered to watch the traditional foot race celebrated during the feast of the Lupercal. Caesar calls to his wife, Calphurnia, to stand close to where the runners will pass so that Mark Antony may touch her. Caesar holds the superstitious belief that if one of these holy runners touches her, she will no longer be sterile. Abruptly, someone shouts out for Caesar. Everyone is quieted, and a voice from the crowd says, "Beware the Ides of March," that is, the 15th day of March. Caesar asks for the person to reveal himself, and a soothsayer steps forward and says again, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar ignores him, saying, "He is a dreamer, let us leave him." And so Caesar and his attendants exit, leaving Cassius and Brutus alone. Cassius begins probing Brutus for his feelings about Caesar's apparent ambition to set himself above and beyond all aristocrats and ruling men, which would be a violation of Roman governing tradition. During their conversation, we hear the crowd cheering. Brutus and Cassius fear that the commoners are clamoring for Caesar to become king. Cassius points out that Caesar is just as much a man as they all are, and hints at the idea of revolt, while the crowd roars again. Brutus admits that he has thought of revolt too, as Caesar and his group returns. Brutus notes that Caesar looks angry and Calphurnia's cheek pale. Caesar immediately goes to Antony and expresses his desire that he wishes fat, sleek-headed men about him that don't look as ambitious, lean, and hungry as Cassius. Caesar and his train exit, leaving Cassius, Casca, and Brutus alone. Casca relates what happened moments ago with the crowd, stating that Antony offered the crown to Caesar 3 times. At the third offer, Caesar fell to the ground and began foaming at the mouth. We, the audience, are to believe Cassius in his belief that the denying of the crown was all for show, and that Caesar earnestly wants the crown. We also learn that Flavius and Morellus were put to silence for pulling scarves off Caesar's images. Casca and Brutus exit, and Cassius soliloquizes about how Brutus is readily manipulated. Cassius further divulges a plan to throw rocks with messages upon them as if they were from the general public, demanding action against Caesar. Scene 3 begins with thunder and lightning as Casca conveys to Cicero the bad omens that have occurred throughout the night. Cicero dismisses Casca's observation, stating that men may construe things after their fashion clean from the purpose of the things themselves. Cicero exits as Cassius enters and enlists Casca into his honorable, dangerous plot against Caesar and names a meeting place for later that night. Cinna, another conspirator, next enters and agrees to take some forged letters to a conspicuous place where Brutus will surely find them. Cinna exits as Cassius and Casca discuss the importance of getting Brutus on board with their plot. Here concludes Act 1 of Julius Caesar for I Hear Shakespeare. At the top of Act 2, Scene 1, we find Brutus alone in his orchard, concluding that Caesar must be killed, not for any personal reason, but for the general good of Rome. Brutus's servant, Lucius, enters with a letter he found. The letter is one of the anonymous letters forged by Cassius, which urges Brutus to protect Rome. A knocking comes, and Lucius opens the door to the conspirators, which include Cassius, Casca, Decius, Cinna, Metellus, and Trebonius. The group confers and decides to kill Caesar, but not, as Brutus would have it, Antony, for then their cause will seem too bloody. Brutus further advises that they kill him as a dish fit for the gods and not as a carcass fit for hounds, so that they may be called purgers and not murderers. Decius volunteers to make sure Caesar comes to the Senate meeting where the murder is to occur. As morning light begins to appear, the conspirators depart, and Portia enters, concerned for Brutus's worried appearance. Brutus may be about to tell Portia at least a part of his mind about Caesar and the conspirators, but then comes a knocking at their door. Brutus sends Portia away, and the elderly Ligarius enters. Ligarius asks about Brutus's intentions with the other assassins. Brutus explains that he is part of the conspiracy, and Ligarius rejoices as the two men exit to the Senate meeting while thunder sounds in the distance. Scene 2 finds Caesar exclaiming how he heard his wife, Calphurnia, cry out in her sleep 3 times, "Help ho, they murder Caesar." Calphurnia enters and, upon remembering the recent omens, insists that Caesar not leave the house today because she fears for his life. Caesar says that he will leave, adding, "Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once." A servant enters and explains that the priests who offered a sacrifice recently have inferred that Caesar should not go out today, since they, the priests, could not find a heart in the entrails of the sacrificed beast. Decius next enters and, upon hearing that Caesar will not come to the Senate meeting, asks for a reason so that he may explain Caesar's absence to the others. Caesar states that Calphurnia had a dream that a statue of Caesar ran blood from 100 spouts. Decius reinterprets Calphurnia's dream, stating that the blood that ran from Caesar's statue was reviving blood, that the people would seek for tinctures, stains, relics, and cognizance. Decius further tempts Caesar to the Senate meeting by stating that the senators have agreed to confer upon Caesar the crown, but that they may change their minds if he doesn't appear today. Caesar immediately calls for his robes and makes ready to go. Scene 3 shows Artemidorus reading a paper which identifies Caesar's many enemies. We learn that Artemidorus may well be Caesar's only ally, since he intends to give his letter to Caesar in the hopes of saving his life. Scene 4 shows Portia in a heated worry about Brutus. She keeps trying to send Lucius on an errand, the purpose which she can't seem to articulate, and so Lucius never leaves. The soothsayer appears and explains that he hopes to warn Caesar again to beware this day. The soothsayer exits, and Portia sends Lucius to the Senate house to bring greetings from Portia to Brutus, and then report back to hear how Brutus reacted. Here concludes Act 2 of Julius Caesar for I Hear Shakespeare. Act 3, Scene 1 opens with Caesar just outside the Capitol, and, upon seeing the soothsayer, confidently says, "The Ides of March are come," to which the soothsayer replies, "Aye, Caesar, but not gone." Artemidorus approaches Caesar and implores him to read the letter he is holding, but Caesar refuses. As the senators and Caesar enter the Capitol, Popilius intercepts Cassius and knowingly says, "I wish your enterprise today might thrive." Trebonius discreetly takes Antony away so that he won't interfere with the assassination. Metellus Cimber next abruptly kneels and begs Caesar to repeal the sentence of banishment imposed on his brother. The others join in the appeal around Caesar, and, as the action comes to a heightened frenzy, Casca stabs Caesar while declaiming, "Speak, hands for me." The others join in the stabbing. Then Caesar, seeing Brutus among the assassins, says, "Et tu, Brute?" Then fall Caesar. Confusion and chaos ensue, and the perpetrators attempt to quiet the onlookers as Trebonius enters and announces that Antony has fled to his house, amazed. Cassius bids the other conspirators to bathe their hands and weapons in Caesar's blood. Brutus determines that they shall go into the streets shouting, "Peace, freedom, and liberty." Cassius next foretells of times to come when this very scene will be enacted, in states unborn and accents yet unknown. A servant enters, bearing a message to Brutus from Antony. The servant conveys that if Brutus can offer good reason why Caesar has been killed, then Antony will follow the fortunes and affairs of noble Brutus, through the hazards of this untrod state with all true faith. Brutus gives his word that Antony should come, and Brutus will explain what has happened, and gives further assurance that Antony will not be harmed. The servant exits, and Antony appears almost instantly. Without going into great detail, Brutus satisfies Antony's concerns for the moment, and Antony seals the understood truce with the other men by shaking their bloody hands. Rather poetically, Antony speaks of dead Caesar, which causes concern in Cassius. Antony asks Cassius's pardon, stating that he only spoke as he did by looking down on Caesar, whom he has said he loved. Antony next requests that he speak at Caesar's funeral. Brutus agrees to let Antony speak at Caesar's funeral, but Cassius advises against it, stating that Antony can sway the multitude with his words. Brutus says that he will speak first, and then Antony. Brutus then takes the time to explain to Antony that he will speak only of the good of Caesar and nothing else, or have no hand at all in the funeral. Everyone exits except Antony, who, over Caesar's body, calls the conspirators butchers and prophesies that a domestic fury and fierce civil strife shall encumber all the parts of Italy. And such bloody horrors will occur that mothers shall but smile when they behold their infants quartered with the hands of war, and Caesar's spirit, ranging for revenge, shall cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. The servant of Octavius Caesar enters and communicates that Octavius, who is the adopted son of Julius Caesar, is 7 leagues from Rome, but will arrive soon enough. Antony asks the servant to stay and observe how the people will react to his speech at Caesar's funeral, and then share the news with Octavius. Scene 2 shows a crowd of plebeians that decide to break up into 2 groups, one to go with Cassius, the other to stay with Brutus to hear the reason why Caesar was killed, and then compare stories. Brutus goes into the pulpit and explains that he loved Caesar and that he killed Caesar because he loved Rome more. He insists that if Caesar were still alive, then everyone would live as slaves, and now they will all live as freemen. Brutus states that what he did would only offend the unpatriotic and ignorant. The crowd shouts that none are offended. Brutus next draws the crowd's attention to Antony, who had no hand in Caesar's death, but shall receive a place in the commonwealth no less than any of the other senators. The plebeians individually express their support for Brutus. One of them even says, "Let him be Caesar." Brutus exits, and the plebeians listen to Antony, who begins his "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears" monologue and eulogy. Antony calls Brutus and the other conspirators honorable men, and reminds the plebeians how Brutus said that Caesar was ambitious. Antony reminds those gathered how Caesar 3 times refused the crown, and how Caesar has been known to weep with the poor. These acts, Antony says, are not the stuff of ambition. The plebeians begin commenting that Caesar has been wronged, and that Antony is the noblest man in Rome. Antony continues his speech, stating that he will not incite the crowd to a riot, for that would be a wrong against Brutus and Cassius. Instead, he will wrong the dead, himself and the people. Antony next produces a parchment which he says is Caesar's will. The plebeians implore Antony to read it, but Antony refuses, reasoning that it would inflame the people and make them mad. Antony admits that he has said too much by speaking of the will, and has wronged the honorable men whose daggers have stabbed Caesar. The plebeians continue pressing Antony to read the will and even call Brutus and the other men traitors. In an effort to make things less official, Antony steps down from the pulpit and asks the plebeian to stand around the covered body of Caesar. Antony next points to the various places on the cloth where Caesar was stabbed, and then dramatically removes the cloth to reveal Caesar's butchered body. The plebeians cry out for revenge and mutiny. Antony implores the plebeians to calm down, stating that he does not know how to rouse people to violence. He only knows how to speak the truth. The crowd is about to disperse when Antony reminds them that he has not yet read Caesar's will. The crowd becomes quiet, and Antony reads in the will that Caesar has left money and certain of his private property to the people, that they may do with what they will. The crowd exits with Caesar's body, intending to burn down the houses of the assassins, and Antony exults in the chaos he has created. A servant next enters, announcing Octavius's arrival in Rome. Scene 3 finds Cinna the poet recalling a dream he had that included a feast with Caesar, where afterwards things fell out badly for him. 4 plebeians arrive and begin a barrage of questions which Cinna cannot hope to answer successfully, for the plebeians are in the mood to kill and nothing else will satisfy. Cinna insists that he is Cinna the poet and not Cinna the conspirator. The conspirators decide that they will kill him for his bad verses and drag him off while calling for torches to burn down the houses of Brutus, Cassius, Decius, Casca, and Ligarius. Here concludes Act 3 of Julius Caesar, for I Hear Shakespeare. Act 4, Scene 1 introduces us to the newly formed triumvirate, which includes Antony, Octavius Caesar, and Lepidus. They are deciding which men should die, and when Octavius says that Lepidus's brother must die, Lepidus consents on the condition that Mark Antony's nephew, Publius, will also be killed. Lepidus is next sent to collect Caesar's will so that they may reduce some of the donations therein. Antony next begins expressing reservations about Lepidus being part of their triumvirate, stating that Lepidus is hardly worthy. Octavius states that Lepidus is a tried and valiant soldier, but that Antony may do his will when it comes to Lepidus. Octavius concludes the scene stating that they have many enemies about that will smile in their faces but have mischief on their minds. Scene 2 takes us to Brutus's camp, where Lucilius and Pindarus explain that Cassius has become reserved and less friendly than in past meetings. Brutus deduces that this is a sign of a cooling friendship between himself and Cassius. A march is heard coming near, which brings some soldiers attending to Cassius, whose first words are, "Most noble brother, you have done me wrong." Cassius is about to launch into accusations when Brutus wisely advises that they move their discussion beyond the eyes and ears of their respective troops, so that they may speak freely and without causing alarm or concern to their soldiers. Scene 3 continues the action with Brutus and Cassius having gone into private quarters. Cassius accuses Brutus of wronging him by condemning Lucius Pella for taking bribes from the Sardians even after Cassius had given written consent for Lucius to do so. Brutus retorts that Cassius should not have done such a thing as sell high-status position for money. Their argument escalates, and Brutus reminds Cassius that when he asked for financial support for his troops, Cassius would not send any. Cassius exclaims that Brutus no longer cares for him, and so asks Brutus to kill him. Their argument finally calms down as a poet enters, insisting that the two leaders should not be left alone when they are so angry. Brutus and Cassius send the poet away, and Brutus calls for a bowl of wine. As they wait for the wine, Brutus explains that Portia is dead because she became impatient in waiting for him to return, and so she swallowed fire. The boy, Lucius, returns with the wine, and the two men drink to one another's renewed friendship and devotion. Titinius and Messala next enter to compare reconnaissance letters. Brutus explains that he has learned that Octavius and Antony have amassed a large army headed for Philippi. Messala concurs and adds that he has heard that Octavius, Antony, and Lepidus have put to death 100 senators. Brutus argues that he has only heard that 70 have died, including Cicero. Brutus next suggests that they make ready to march to Philippi, a plan that Cassius disagrees with. Cassius suggests that they wait for the army to come to them, reasoning that then the opposing army will be weary and tired. Brutus counters, stating that the land that Octavius and Antony march through holds people that will join Antony's army and so make their numbers greater. Cassius agrees to Brutus's plan, and they all make ready to rest before the march. Before retiring, Brutus calls for Varus and Claudio to sleep in his tent in case he needs them in the middle of the night. Brutus insists that Varus and Claudio go to sleep and rest rather than stay awake to watch over him. Brutus next asks for young Lucius to play music and sing for him, but the boy falls asleep after only a few seconds of effort. Brutus thinks to read a book he recently found when the ghost of Caesar enters his tent. When Brutus asks the apparition to identify itself, it says it is "Thy evil spirit, Brutus." The ghost only says that it will see Brutus again at Philippi and then disappears. Brutus wakes Lucius, Varus, and Claudio and insists that they called out in their sleep. They deny waking or calling out. Brutus asks if they saw anything, to which they all reply, no. Here concludes Act 4 of Julius Caesar for I Hear Shakespeare. Act 5, Scene 1 takes us to Octavius and Antony at Philippi, where the two leaders bicker over the reason why Brutus and Cassius have met them at Philippi rather than wait at Sardis. A messenger arrives and alerts the two men that Brutus and Cassius's army are on the field and wish to meet for parley. Antony orders Octavius to stay to the left side of the field, while Antony will keep to the right. Octavius cries that he wants it the other way around, with him to the right and Antony to the left. Brutus and Cassius, Antony and Octavius come forward to exchange words, insults, and blame for the battle about to begin. After they have hurled accusations long enough, the pairs go back to their armies. While pondering what fate lay ahead, Brutus tells Cassius, "But this same day must end that work, the Ides of March begun." They both agree that suicide is better than being paraded through the streets if they should be captured in battle. With that, the two men bid one another farewell. Scene 2 depicts Brutus ordering Messala to attack a weakening part of Octavius's forces. Scene 3 takes the action to Cassius and Titinius, who explains that Brutus ordered the troops to move too quickly, and now Antony has the advantage. Cassius orders Titinius to ride towards some distant troops to verify if they are friend or foe, and then asks his servant Pindarus to examine what happens as Titinius rides out. Pindarus watches and relays that Titinius is no longer on his horse, and so must be captured and likely killed, for they are all shouting joyously. Despairing, Cassius orders Pindarus to stab him, saying, "Caesar, thou art revenged, even with the sword that killed thee." Having slayed his master, Pindarus declares that, being a free man, he shall flee where never Roman shall take note of him. We next find that Pindarus misperceived what happened with Titinius, for Titinius and Messala return with news that Brutus has defeated Octavius's troops, while Antony has defeated Cassius's legions. Seeing Cassius dead, Messala goes to inform Brutus what has happened, while Titinius mourns the body of Cassius, and with irony says, "Didst thou not hear their shots? Alas, thou hast misconstrued everything." Cassius next places a wreath of victory he had gotten earlier on Cassius's head, and then kills himself with the same sword that ended the lives of Caesar and Cassius. Brutus enters and, seeing the bodies of Cassius and Titinius, exclaims, "O Julius Caesar, thou art mighty yet. Thy spirit walks abroad and turns our swords in our own proper entrails." Brutus promises to mourn Cassius with his tears at another time, but for now he prepares for a second attack before nightfall. Scene 4 finds Brutus making a retreat, while Lucilius pretends to be Brutus to draw forces away from the real Brutus. Antony appears and commends Lucilius for his clever and valiant act. Scene 5 finds Brutus admitting defeat and asking the help of one of his officers to commit suicide, arguing that it is more worthy to leap into a pit ourselves than tarry till they push us. His officers protest, and as Antony's army approaches, Brutus sends everyone away except Strato, who agrees to hold Brutus's sword as Brutus impales himself upon it. Having killed himself, Brutus cries out, "Caesar, now be still. I killed not thee with half so good a will." Antony, Octavius, Messala, and Lucilius enter. Upon learning how Brutus killed himself, Antony says, "This was the noblest Roman of them all. All the conspirators, save only he, did that they did in envy of great Caesar. He, only in a general honest thought and common good to all, made one of them all. His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, 'This was a man.'" But it is Octavius who speaks the last words of the play. He says, "So call the field to rest, and let's away, to part the glories of this happy day." Brutus, then, is Shakespeare's first character whose inner conflict is more interesting than his outward actions. Here concludes Act 5 of Julius Caesar, for I Hear Shakespeare.